This is Chris Osborne from Play Comics, and you are listening to Genuine Chit-Chat.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week, I speak with my buddy Wayne. Wayne is a paleontologist and also an author. He writes fiction books at the moment, and we basically have two brilliant chats. This one is to do with his books and about him being an author, some of the sort of things that motivated him to becoming an author, as well as going deeper into some more important issues. We talk about the concept of good versus evil and morality and immorality, societal issues, as well as changing the world with ideas and individualism. And towards the end of the podcast as well, Wayne just says this real great inspirational, almost like a speech, when he's promoting the book, which is well worth the listen just on its own, really. But as I say, with this, even though Wayne is an author and we do talk about his books to a fair degree, even if you're not necessarily that interested in buying the book or anything like that, it's really worth just listening in. Just the conversation's great. We don't just talk about the book. That's the main kind of thing I'm rambling and wittering on about, is trying to kind of hit home. Is this is one of those great chats, because even if you're not interested in the book per se, I think it'll make you interested in the book, because both books, they sound fantastic, but also we go deeper into sort of being human in a sense and that sort of thing. So the podcast will start up in a moment, and also next week it's another chat with Wayne, but as I said at the start, we talk about paleontology. So that's as Wayne described it, is the time period between sort of the start of time essentially on Earth all the way up to recorded history of humans, or human history. And that chat is absolutely phenomenal as well. So definitely check out this one, and definitely the next one. The paleontology chat is one of my all-time favourite chats I've had on the podcast so far. It's just fantastic. We could have spoken for hours and hours and hours. We just condensed it down to 1 hour. I say condensed it down, we just chatted for an hour. And then I imagine I'll have him on again, and we'll probably talk about paleontology a bit more. I mentioned to him in the podcast about him and Josh, because obviously Josh I do science but simple with, him and Josh being on the podcast and chatting about things, because Josh with a degree in marine biology and Wayne with a degree in paleontology, and then me just a prat who just got through college. So yeah, the future looks bright. Anyway, I am going to stop rambling now. All the links and all that sort of jazz are in the info of this episode for all of Wayne's, or both of Wayne's books and whatnot. I'll keep anyone posted with anything else that he releases over the coming years on social media and all that sort of jazz. And I just wanted to do a quick shout out to the Now That I'm Older podcast, who gave Genuine Chit-Chat a shout out, which I'm always super appreciative of. So make sure you guys go check out Now That I'm Older. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys, and I'll be back at the end. Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. What I want to do with it is I want to make it so that when people come on it, like yourself or any of my other mates, or any other people I know, it's free to come on. I mean, we've just in this obviously been over for a couple of hours, and we're just chatting and catching up. So we haven't seen each other in so long. It's like, well, you can have a conversation with you and Josh, because I've had 3 people on the podcast at once, because the mic's quite good for picking up a lot of things. Can have a big conversation about politics. We can have one, about religion and that sort of ideologies, and because you're very well adverse to religion, and my mate Dom is, so maybe organising something like that. There's obviously you're wearing a Killswitch Engage t-shirt like that. There's music, there's movies, there's all your travels across everything. So there's such a, almost putting it into an hour is almost, it's kind of like diminishing it in a sense, because there's just so much we can talk about. So, so we'll start then. Guys, I'm with my buddy Wayne, who up till today I hadn't seen in about 5 years, I think it was. I think I said 7 a minute ago, but I meant 5 of college, and we went to the same secondary school together. And Wayne's been a busy boy. We're going to have 2 podcasts. We're going to aim for that. Wayne's written 2 books, and also has a degree in paleontology, and has travelled around a lot of Europe and that sort of thing, looking at basically fossils in layman's terms for everyone. So what we'll do is, this podcast will be about the author, will be about him being an author and about the books primarily, and then we'll do another podcast about paleontology, I think, as well. So, well, let's make it easy. Let's start from kind of the very start, because obviously from college, when did you begin when did you begin thinking about like writing a book? What was the sort of the trigger, in a sense, to make you think you want to get into publishing, that sort of jazz?
The trigger for writing a book basically came from wanting to have my opinions viewed, basically. Because up until that point, it was a case of you were always under the dogma, if you didn't vote, your voice didn't mean anything. Or if you have an opinion and it's too strong for someone, you shouldn't view it. You shouldn't voice it. And if your voice isn't going to carry any sort of power, you shouldn't even display it at any sort of point at all. But through history, we see people standing up for what they call, right. We have Emmeline Pankhurst, standing up for women's rights. You have
Martin Luther King,
yeah. And you have so many people standing up for things that they believe in society is either wrong or misguided or could be done better. Now, that basically got me thinking, right, okay, obviously we came out of school from English literature with pretty decent grades, so we thought, okay, fine, let's try our hand at it. In school, it was a case of, I watched a very classic film, The Blob. It was like 1953.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it, yeah.
It was like, do you know what? This would actually be a really decent horror movie if it had a decent story to go by. I mean, taking the CGI aside and the casting as well, it's not a bad film, and you think to yourself, right, okay, this could have sort of like John Carpenter's The Thing elements about it. And because that was based off a book by Edward Steeple, Halt Who Goes There, because it was based off of that book, it seemed to add another element to it, and it made it so much more scary because you could never tell who the thing was, because it had this ability to duplicate people at a whim. You could think, oh, okay, they've nailed it in that guy, and then the guy who's just killed that version of it is carrying it himself, and you're just like, oh my god, you never know, it's a complete mind blow up until the last moment. So I thought, right, I'll rewrite The Blob. Who am I going to cast for it? Let's just add a few school friends, so I put a load of school friends in there, and I sort of came away from it halfway and thought, no, it's not really going to amount to anything. And then I came back to it through uni. It was actually going through quite a trialing period halfway through the first year. To spare most of the details, our life pretty much took a turn for the worst. I found myself in a pretty dark place. But through it all, basically I came out thinking, do you know what, I'm not going to be ignored anymore. I'm not going to have people that were so close to me at one point and not hear me. I'm not just going to be a whisper that can just be snuffed out. The whole point, a lot of people can turn around and say it was an accident that we're here, or it's for a purpose or whatever. I would sooner believe in purpose, because the world only changes if you agree it's going to change, and if you stand to change it. So basically, I started writing A Light in the Mist when I came through that experience, because I thought the best thing about going through experiences in life is then you can help people that might be experiencing the same thing. We're highly influenced with our music and all that kind of stuff, which is constantly telling you to build others up around you, constantly encouraging you. If you don't like the way the world is, make it better, make it a better place, be the beacon of hope for everyone that the world might not be offering right now. So this is what we hope to create. Plus the fact, it's almost like giving you, whether you believe in a deity or not, it gives you the power of a god, because you're able to create your own world. You're able to control and manipulate every event in that world, and it can go exactly how you've envisioned your own life or whatever adventure you come up with yourself. So you might think to yourself, do you know what? I've failed in a certain area of my life, so I've failed. Maybe I haven't been so adventurous. So you write the perfect adventure story.
Yeah.
Or perhaps I failed at relationships. You write a romance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stereotypically, you think, oh, any guy that writes a romance, they're just mushy or sappy or whatever. But you think, no, actually, there's a lot of psychological elements you can actually get in there, a lot of past experience and a lot of your own characteristics that you can portray in that. Some of the greatest films, like Oscar nominees, and even not, are based on romance. I mean, I was watching Ants last night.
Oh, yeah.
Classic movie.
Yeah.
That is a romance through and through, because it's about your average Joe who doesn't think he has a chance with the princess of the colony, and yet they end up together at the end. It's like, it's completely sweet. And then going to the Oscar nominee, you've got Titanic.
Yes.
It is a full-on, romance, and it, for me, it's completely an inspiration, because nothing portrays the power of the wealth divide more than that. And that's another driving effect toward the books. But the main reason, getting back onto the point, is writing A Light in the Mist enables me to tackle either what I disagree with in the world or how something could be done better. So I'll tackle things, and I even put it in the blurb. I'll tackle things like immorality, the wealth divide, racial prejudice, stereotyping, the fact that individualism is disappearing. People are placed into neat categories, in such subtle ways nowadays.
Labeling and things like that, of all of that sort of size and sight, and you always want to, society's trying to compartmentalize all of us into, you're the millennials, you're the this, but they do it in America. That is quite bad with that sort of thing, especially with one of the big things recently, obviously, was police brutality and Black Lives Matter. Is even, I agree with Black Lives Matter. I obviously agree with that because I'm not a racist piece of shit, but it's like, even the idea of saying, like, all the police officers are racist against all black people, it's like, well, you're now you're even saying all police officers being wrong. Like, there's the Ice Cube song, Fuck the Police, and it's like, in a lot of ways, you agree with that ideology, but also you can't just say fuck them all, because that's as bad as them saying every black person is a thief or a criminal or something. And it's like, well, you have to... Every person has to be looked at as an individual case basis, in a sense. Precisely. And that's the problem. The problem with our judicial system and America's, and the problem with our political system and all these sorts of other things, is that they never want to say this one thing can be okay. They want to say you have to fit into these two groups. And if this group's got this ideology and this group's got that ideology, and you have to fit yourself into one of them rather than them changing to appeal to everyone. It's like, well, if you believe in, free education, then you're definitely on the left. But equally, if you believe in free education, but you also believe in tighter immigration control for whatever reason, which is, there's a lot of arguments for that argument, which I understand and I agree with to a degree. It's like, if you believe equally that, say, immigration should be tighter as well as, healthcare should be free and education should be free, you can't fit. You either have to choose one or the other of those elements, and you have to. Then you end up going in this team of, you have to be team left or team right. In America it was Hillary or Trump, and both were horrendous candidates. And over here it was Corbyn or Theresa May. And obviously I'm a Jeremy Corbyn guy. I think Corbyn's great, but I didn't agree with everything he said. There were quite a few elements he had of certain parts which I really didn't agree with, but you have to choose a team. And understandably, with the political system, it's a bit more difficult, even though you can have more like the French political system, which is like, everyone gets, there's like, any party gets equal vote and you can choose for everyone, and then the two that got the most there then go against each other, just that one against that one, and it's better than the almost two-party system we got. But it's, as you say, with individualism, it's the way our society's built up and the way the sort of corporate elites and all that sort of stuff, they want to have us compartmentalized into this thing, because when you're an individual with an individual thoughts, you go against the grain. You start thinking about ways you can change the world, ways that things can be improved. And the people at the very, very, very top, not even the 1%, the beyond the 1%, 0.001%, they're the ones who own Walmart, who own, like, the CEOs of all the big businesses. They don't want anything to change because they're the richest people on the planet. They have no consequence for any of their actions, and they control, especially in America with lobbying and stuff, they control the laws. Why would they want an average Joe to have an opinion? Because every one average Joe that has an opinion can be one person who disagrees with their ideologies. So what you're saying there is, it's got such a huge rippling effect of the whole way the world works, in a lot of ways, of just, don't stroke everyone with the same broad brush. You have to look at it individually. So what you're, even just at the grain, we haven't even gotten to the point of what the book's about yet, but even your reasons for writing the book and your sort of mindset is a very refreshing. It's a very refreshing thing to hear. So with your book, the Light in the Mist, as you say, it was what other elements is it? You've said what we've been driving for, what kind of inspired you to write it. So what's the general idea of it? What's the premise, in a sense, if you can market it in a sense?
It's a backstory to the Jekyll and Hyde original that was written in 1886.
Yeah.
Basically, it ends on a cliffhanger. He's just. It starts off with Jekyll, and he already knows how to separate his own consciousness. He already is aware of good and evil. He's already aware of how to make a potion, so he's got background in chemistry. Where did that come from? And he ends up hanging himself in the end. So you think, right, who wins in the inevitable struggle between good and evil? No one.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, fine. So I thought, right, let's do, not to do what so many films do and say, oh, let's come up with a origin story. And it's like, oh man. But this was the idea of how would he be able to see good and evil in someone? How would he be able to witness that on a day-to-day basis? And I thought, let's make him a detective, because when you're in the courtroom, you can see someone who comes in with a straight baby face, and you think, oh yeah, they're the nicest person. They're a humanitarian. They're the headmaster of a school. And you think, oh wow, they've got everything going for them. Then they're convicted a known paedophile, and you think, wow, that evil has been residing there behind those glazed eyes.
Yeah.
And the judge is the only person who's been able to see that based on the evidence. And that's the point. If you are witnessing the good and the evil in front of everyone, you're then going to start having thoughts about yourself. You're going to start thinking, well, does that evil reside in me? But it's also more of a battle between like people that are more spiritually inclined, because just as much as we try to be holy and we put on this face of self-righteousness, you're still going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Everybody that professes to be is wrong.
Yes.
Because as far as I'm concerned, we're human. You're going to make mistakes.
Yes.
It's genetically imprinted into us.
It's almost how we evolved in a way, as we were talking about earlier. It's like the way we evolved was gene mutations, which is almost things trying to copy themselves, and little bits not being copied identically, which you could argue is a mistake. Yeah. But if it wasn't, evolution wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't even be individuals. Exactly. It would mean that every time someone has a child, all the children they have would be identical. That doesn't work, as you say. So I agree with you there, yeah. Yeah,
precisely. So you come from there and you think, right, okay, so there's always going to be a dark side to someone, so, and in exploring that myself, you're listening to goth music or rock music, that's sort of on the darker side, and yes, some of the lyrics can be somewhat
provocative in certain ways.
Yeah. And you think, okay, yeah, fine, but there's always an underlying message, and in the same way, you have in The Light in the Mist, Jekyll basically is finding himself, so he starts off as your by-the-book detective, and he's like, right, we do it the way of the system and nothing else. And as he's going through this case, he starts to realise flaws in the system. He starts to realise that the system itself might actually be at fault, and that this evil that he's pursuing might actually be working inside the people that he's worked with his entire life. He then goes through, basically, it's Victorian London, so a lot of the history is sort of a good backdrop. He's going through, and just as the constabulary is finding itself within technology, fingerprinting hasn't even been developed yet, not until 1903. So it's very much based on him just having to solve things literally just with his mind. But we then start to pick up hints of Hyde. It's almost like he's been born with this alternate ego, almost like he suffers from a split personality disorder. So he comes up to a crime scene and he'll notice that things are glowing gold, and he'll think, well, why is it doing that? And he asks his assistant, James Flynn, he's like, can you see that or can you smell that? He notices that his senses are heightened. And James will turn around and be like, what are you talking about? No, I can't smell that perfume. No, I can't see that. That's not gold. What are you talking about? And he'll see words, and things that are invisible to the naked eye. He starts to realise that he has a sixth sense, perhaps even like an out-of-body experience. And as he goes through, he starts to understand why he has this. And, not to ruin the story, but as soon as he comes into the final confrontation with the evil, he finally discovers why he has this gift, why he's been given this gift, and then he's given the choice, what are you going to do with it, basically.
I see.
That then leads on to the end of the book, but all the way throughout, it's questioning, it's not so much creating a fence between good and evil. It's saying what can be perceived as good, what can be perceived as evil, what can be both sides of the fence. It's more about tearing the fence down and having people stand firmly in the middle and say, well, we'll take aspects of this and we'll take aspects of that, and we can sometimes moosh them together. Yes, there are things that are clear cut. It's good or it's evil. But there are some things, like, for example, a lot of people think, things like euthanasia and abortion are wrong.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's, you're taking away a life. Yeah, I completely understand that. On the other hand, as far as abortions are concerned, if it's medically a problem and it's going to involve the death of the mother as well, completely understand that. If it was not expected, if she was a victim of some sort of sexual assault,
precisely,
you can understand that. Same with euthanasia. You would not wish to see your dying relative, endure pain and that kind of thing. You would wish them to be put,
out of their misery.
Yeah,
exactly. And from my own personal experience with my father dying of cancer, I mean, fortunately, he was ill for about a year and a half, and then the end of his life, the last month he was in a lot of pain, but he got really bad the last week or so. And I was just thinking, in the last week, I was just like, I kind of just want him to pass away soon, because he could easily, you get people alive in hospices for months, if not years sometimes, and they're just on the verge of death, but the painkillers and almost their own human instinct of will to live is keeping them going, when in reality they want to die. There's people like Tony Nicholson, who was, or Nicholson, whichever one, he had Motorin syndrome, which is I think it's either the same thing or very similar to what Stephen Hawking has, and it's your body just shuts down, and it's just your mind is still awake. And he said he wanted to die, but because he couldn't move, the only way he could die would be if his wife was the one to kill him. But even if she took him to, I think it's either Sweden or Switzerland, somewhere like that, where they have assisted suicide, where you can have euthanasia. If she took him there and came back, she'd get arrested, because you'd be punishable by helping suicide. Yeah. And that's illegal. And it's just like this backward system of, there are so many, as we were just saying, there's so many grey areas in life. And you saying about this whole, the brilliance, I hadn't looked further into the book because I wanted to speak to you about it first, so I can really, almost like with the listeners, have all the new information straight away. And I just think the idea of that, having the split personality of the Jekyll and the Hyde sort of archetypes of just good, unquote, and evil, and then having the human vessel being like the thing of fighting, the two things fighting within them, is parallel to almost every human, as you say. Like, there's no one who's a saint, and that's a problem that I find with certain religious organizations. When you have someone like the Pope or certain priests, you often see, obviously, with a lot of the paedophilia that's happened in the Catholicism and things like that, it's like, because you have these people who are expected to be 100% pure, the darkness within them that may have only been a flicker ends up becoming this huge embering big fire of, in quote unquote, evil, which they can't curb until it's too late, and then it comes out in this horrendous way with those being, sexual deviants and things like that, and doing horrendous stuff to children. And it's like, every human has got this battle within them. Every time you have an argument with someone, there's that part of you that just wants to either yell at them or sometimes be violent towards them. And then also, when you see people on the street, like homeless people, most people who aren't psychopaths, you look at them and there's part of you that goes, I just want to give them all my money and bring them in and help them. But you know that not only is that not a realistic thing, that maybe it wouldn't help this individual, or that your own life can't adhere to such a massive change in your life. You can't have the burden of taking on this other human and caring for them. It's every decision you make in life is almost the idea of the good and the evil fighting, and whichever one comes out is the decision you make. And breaking down what you think is the good and what you think is the evil, and making it much more of a, we're just human, apart from the obvious sort of clear-cut things, it's just, you're human, and you have to delve into the darkness to sometimes realise what the light can be, and vice versa. And it's, so you saying about that just makes it sound incredibly interesting, of using the, in a sense, the template of the Jekyll and Hyde to explain human imperfections is just, it's fantastic. And it sounds like riveting. It sounds, in fact, very, very interesting. I'll certainly have to look into that. And that sounds like the kind of thing that you said, we'll go on to your second book in a moment, but you said that you're thinking about a whole series and you've got ideas for all these sorts of other things. The way you've just described it to me immediately screams Netflix show. Like, I'm not saying that you're writing this just so it could be a Netflix show, but like, I find that a movie wouldn't be able to almost articulate the detail of the points that you'd need for this, because I imagine with it being a case sort of thing with a detective, an episodic would be perfect, because it wouldn't be a rush. It would be like each episode is a step in the right direction. Like, I know it's not the same sort of thing, but have you seen Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
Like, that would work as a film, because the change of him in 2 hours, even if it was a 3-hour film, probably wouldn't quite be enough. There's a film like Wolf of Wall Street that managed to pull it off. That's a fantastic movie, but that's a very long film. But if you had Breaking Bad as a film, probably be a pretty good film.
Yeah.
But as a series, you get to see over time the change and the transformation, and it's so human of this man who only wanted to do it for his family, and it just becomes more and more corrupted by his own. He delves into the darkness to save the light, but he ends up going so far in the dark that he gets trapped there, and it's all the best shows, relatively all the best shows, are just, they boil down to just the human condition. And what about it, when you can relate to characters in a show, that's when they've got the most, they're the most famous, they're the most popular. Game of Thrones is a great example. There's so many characters, everyone finds someone they connect with, and because there's such a wide variety and certain characters that have been in the show for so long, you show how people and experiences hit them and affect them and change them, and what it makes them do, and all the ways that different humans that are, we're almost wired in similar ways from the start, but because of genes and experiences, it changes who you are. And with this, it sounds like every case he does, it changes him a little bit, and as he's getting to terms with himself and getting to terms with the two parts within him fighting, is every step he takes, he's learning and understanding more about it. So it sounds incredibly interesting. It sounds like the depth that you can go into just on this premise. Like, I haven't read the book, just not even speaking about the actual in-depth plot, just how far you can go with it. That's, to me, sounds like episodically that would be fantastic. So I think that would be a good lead on to the second book, which is Scarcrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So would you like to vaguely describe the premise of that in a sense, and sort of your ideas of future books and what's sort of going on with that then?
It follows on from the first one. Not to basically spoil the first one, but basically the protagonist ends up disappearing, and we pick up the story from the point of view of a different protagonist. Now, he himself has come from a pretty mottled past. You know, he's been involved in every underworld criminal organization you can imagine, and he's forever trying to escape that past. You know, so he's gone to Oxford University, he studied to become a pathologist, and he's basically like, okay, that's fine, right. But the criminal organization that Jekyll stumbles upon in the first one, he actually was a part of them.
Ah, I see.
So the protagonist, who's wanting to escape that criminal organisation, they're not quite through with him yet. So they, commit a murder, and he finds himself roped into this case. And, before he's even realised it, it's screaming, this criminal organisation. He's picking up calling cards and all these different kinds of things, and he's thinking, oh no, my past is coming back to haunt me, sort of thing.
Yeah. What
you then don't realise is, as part of this criminal organisation, again, it tackles the same thing as Jekyll with the split personalities. I love it. I use it in every book that we've got planned for the series. There's always a split personality or some differentiation of personality to get the right balance of this good and evil construct.
Yeah, yeah.
And with Scarecrow, it's an embodiment where he actually sort of places his alter ego but into an object. Some people will focus their own ambitions into something. So you'll hear a lot about psychopaths that will, oh, God told me to do it, or they'll put a mask on and say it was the mask that was talking to me. Well, it's similar to that. Basically, Scarecrow is just the mask of a scarecrow. It's nothing more. But to the main protagonist, Jack Oliver Lantern, which is Jack
O'Lantern. That's good. I like that. That's pretty good. I love little pun names and stuff like that. It's fantastic. I love that sort of thing. Yeah.
So he comes in, and he's sort of like, he's got this shrine downstairs beneath this asylum that he owns, and he basically comes to the mask, and it's almost like it has power over him. He can hear it, speaking to him in the background. He even has full on like arguments to the point where he'll strike the wall with his fist. And, his doctors, he'll be working in the asylum, he'll be, conducting post-mortems, and they'll sort of be looking at him as if to say, is everything all right? And he's like, yeah, it's fine, it's just too noisy in here. And they're all like, okay, fair enough, But the good thing is he tries to cover it up by, again, being the humanitarian, trying to be the good person, because he goes out into the streets of London, and obviously during that time the East End of London was an absolute poophole.
Yeah,
it's basically like the slums that you would find in Brazil or Sao Paulo or something like that. Basically it's like the modern version of most of the adverts you see for UNICEF or WaterAid.
Yeah.
It was absolute derelict conditions. But what he does is he goes out and he gets these children and he says, look, if you are willing to come and work for me, I can give you an education that you would otherwise have to pay for. I can teach you pathology. I can teach you the skills, how to survive, and also imbue them with the skills that he's learned from the various criminal organizations. So if he's like, you want to know how to steal and not get caught, you want to know how to pick locks, you want to know how to get past the bobby, you want to know where they patrol, I can teach you all of that. So it's basically like he takes on his own flock, if you will, and he refers to them as ravens.
Okay, I see.
So it's sort of the whole Scarecrow watching over the field of ravens type
Brilliant.
thing.
That's very good. Yeah, I like that.
So they come in, and when he's conducting his postmortems, he dresses up as this Scarecrow persona, and he has them dressed in sort of like a plague monk type garb, so that it fits the raven type persona.
Yes, yeah.
That's all happening sort of out of the public eye, and if anyone were to stumble upon it, they'd think it was some sort of ritualistic cult. But he still dabbles in the sort of pathology, he's still solving a crime in the midst of it all. But the idea is that it's sort of also based off the character from Scarecrow's Batman. I see, yeah. Now, the interesting thing was we actually found a way to medically synthesize a fear toxin. If you take an extract from a fungi known as Psilocybe semilanceata.
I see, yeah, right.
And you dilute it in 100 mils of methanol, and then you combine it with cigarette smoke, it actually gives the fear-inducing toxin effect that you would expect to find in Scarecrow's toxin from any Batman movie.
Wow, okay, yeah.
So what he does is he creates gloves that can, one can disperse the cigarette smoke, one can he has the sort of the injections and the Indian rubber tubes leading up to it so that he can inject people with the psilocybin extract. And so sort of in the day, he's doing everything by the book. He comes across as your average detective. By night, he's sort of doing a Batman, if you will, and he's going out, he's questioning the eyewitnesses, but he's not questioning them. He's basically putting them under the influence of a psychedelic and basically using fear to intimidate a confession from them. This goes even further because it's almost like it meets the Saw franchise as well.
Yeah.
Whilst they're under the influence, he takes them back to his asylum where he has loads of torture devices that he's either cooked up himself or taken from history. And what he does is he uses fear simply as the intimidation. So, for example, he'll put them in, let's say, the Judas chair. He'll sit them in that, and he'll put a corset around them that is wired with explosives. And he'll say, right, you have a minute to talk into this phonograph and confess your part that you've played in the crime. And basically, if you don't say everything you need to in that minute, the corset's going to go off and there's going to be nothing left of you. But then, so they'll stream out their life history, basically. And just before the time goes up, the trigger flicks, they realise the explosives are duds. And that he's used fear and fear alone to coax out these confessions, so it's not quite criminal. Then he injects them, obviously, with a sleep potion or whatever.
Sedative.
Yeah. And, they wake up in their home not remembering anything, and anything they tried to say to the constabulary, oh, I was kidnapped by a scarecrow who tried to intimidate. Yeah, that's really going to sound like a hardcore alibi.
Exactly. So, that's very intriguing. Yeah, that's... The intrigue with this, and that's obviously the future of the series as you're going into it, is the human mind, as we were saying a little bit earlier. And just like, it's interesting that you brought up psilocybin, because I mentioned in my podcast with my friend Carla, we spoke about hallucinogenics a bit with, and before the podcast we were discussing them a small amount, where people who may have recognised the name psilocybin is the one found in magic mushrooms and also in LSD. And for years and years and years before, they were used, people would know about shamanic rituals and things like that, where that was primarily ayahuasca or peyote, which is basically a way of ingesting a thing, which it's for DMT. Because DMT is dimethyltryptamine, and this is a thing where people can go into like spiritual states and things like that, and when you consume it, it needs to be put with another thing, which is what the ayahuasca is. Basically, it makes it digestible via your stomach, and all this. I'm not going to go into horrendous like details about all the sort of drugs and stuff, but that's like a scratching the surface sort of thing. So you can put people in certain induced states with psilocybin and a lot of other things. So, and obviously it's very clear that you've done your research and all these sorts of things, which is obviously very good to hear from an author rather than just someone going, I have an idea of something crazy happening, let's just put it down. I assume you did quite a bit of research into sort of Victorian era. Is it London? You said
yes,
it was East London when you said about the Derrick. So yeah, I was right. I make sure I'm not remembering wrong things. And so you've done, your research into sort of Victorian style London, as well as, I imagine, were you a fan of the Jekyll and Hyde or Jekyll and Hyde books and things like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's one of those. There's a lot of older stories which. They're so groundbreaking in that you read them now and some people feel like they don't pack the punch they used to, because there's so many things that have been made which some argue which are like better's the wrong way of saying it because that's for purely subjective, but let's say that for one word. People go, I don't like the old Jekyll and Hyde book because there's so many other versions of it that's better. But it's like, but people don't they don't respect the groundbreaking sort of the change of literature when they had a thing of saying humans have this. I know it's not exactly the same, but humans have this monster within them, and saying that yes, there's this one guy who had it, but it's meant to be. It couldn't say at that time everyone's got this monster because people would just be like, oh, that's stupid, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But having this one person with it opens the door, because it's like with a lot of people, if they have issues, if someone's got loads of problems, the best way to necessarily get them to admit to them or potentially change their life isn't to hold them up to a mirror and say these are the things that were wrong with you. One of the best things to do is to show them other scenarios, other examples of things, of issues, and they connect the links in their own mind of the parallels between that. And I think the one you were doing in this books is really interesting. And I assume each book, it's still going to have, as you said, the good and evil in a sense sort of aspect of it. But I imagine it's going to be sort of tackling different angles from this sort of thing, and there's going to be different characters, different perspectives of, without spoiling anything, you don't have to admit to this if you don't have to, but is it going to be a generally same sort of time frame and just different perspectives of similar events?
Yes, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Whenever I see, like, one of the film series come out recently is obviously the Cloverfield franchise, and even though many people argue a lot of the Cloverfield films aren't that amazing in that way, what I like the most about the third one coming out was Paradox on Netflix. The film itself I didn't find was that amazing, but I liked as it expanded the universe of, I love the same story being told from different perspectives. There's so many shows, a lot of them are sitcoms to be fair, but there's so many other things that come out where perspective is such a powerful thing when it comes to empathizing with other people, when it comes to personal experience, when it comes to the law, as when you mentioned with the judges and that sort of thing. And it's like, perspective means everything, because one perfect example, which I think I was taught in school, was a cube looks like a square from one perspective. You only need to rotate it ever so slightly and it's different. But even with a prism, if you have a square-based prism, but obviously for people who maybe aren't fully aware, it's like basically a pyramid. So if you have a pyramid but it's got four sides, you look at it from the bottom or the perfect top, it just looks like a square. You rotate it slightly, it becomes a triangle, and it's just like, that is obviously a ridiculous simplification of it all, but even something so simple as a shape of something, a different perspective can completely change your ideology of it. It then goes with the human mind and the psyche, and like, you have people with mental illnesses, whether it's things as quite severe as schizophrenia and those sorts of things with more vivid hallucinations, but dialing it down to social anxiety and depression, and just when people have depression or social anxiety, one thing to them, the exact same thing to someone else, doesn't mean the same. Someone with social anxiety, if some person is giving them 1 second more eye contact than they used to, they can then think that to the person who's giving them more eye contact, they didn't even think about it, they just looked in the eyes a bit more. But the person receiving that, they can think, oh, they're staring at me a bit more, they're doing this, doing it, and all these sorts of bits that can come into it. So different perspectives from the same thing is so important, as well as so intriguing, because I imagine what you'll be doing as well will be, there'll be an event that happen and the reader will think, okay, it's definitely in this way, and then you have another person's perspective on it and it completely changes the way you view it and things, and that sort of thing. And it's very clever for you to be able to do that, because it's much more difficult writing the same story, not same exact, but similar sort of event with different perspectives of it, which give you different impressions of it while all still keeping in continuity, rather than just having one linear constant story, because that you don't have the same continuity issues. But because if this is something very small, but say for example the protagonist in the first two books, they both see someone get murdered and there's a handkerchief that's at the scene of the crime. If one of them, if in your book you say it was in a heap on the left and the other one you say it was actually flat on the right, even something so insignificant as that would change how an individual would see the whole crime scene. So if you don't have the sort of the mental sort of organization to be able to compartmentalize the right areas and to be able to remember each individual part of every story and all the different perspectives, and also mixed in with that, how, if you don't mind me asking, with the books, are they from first person perspective?
Yes, they are.
So it's first person makes it even more in depth for that, because you really have to write in a convincing way of, you have the you feel what the character feels in a way, while also still being a reader and being able to analyze to some degree. But obviously seeing things from perspective, especially with the first book, it'll be like, is you'll think, this is empirical fact, this is what it is. And then the other book will open up the more doorways of everything the first protagonist saw maybe isn't the way they saw it. And then obviously with the whole, with you said, with the protagonist being, they see certain things in gold, see certain things that may not be there. Obviously that kind of opens it up in a different way of, it's all about perspective. So what you're doing with these books, that just sounds incredibly intriguing. You know, it's very interesting. And when did you, with this specific story, has this kind of been a vague idea in a pipeline for many, many years, or was it kind of one day inspiration kind of hit you in more of a thing? What was the sort of the process of actually sitting down and fully writing the ideas down and that sort of thing? Was it quite a quick one, or?
Yeah, it was pretty much a decision made in a few weeks. Basically, like I say, as soon as I came through the time in my life where I thought, you know, our voice pretty much means nothing, I thought, do you know what? There's no time like the present. Yeah. So you just you sit down and you start writing and you think, actually, this has got something good to it. You know, when you've got passion, and when it's almost like your inner voice starts going, and it's, you know, it's almost like you're acting out in your head each different scene. You know? So I thought, I'll invest in a whiteboard, because I just attracted to the whole idea, and I was just like, right, okay, I'm gonna draw everything I want to describe. Every time I had to make a description, I drew it in sort of stickman image, and then I just built upon it. So it was like, oh, I can see this thing extra, I can see this, I can see this. What I started with was everything that's historically accurate. So I can't just introduce a tram into Victorian London, because it wouldn't have been there. Yeah. So I'm like, right, okay, these are the things that have to be there. What about the things that could have been around at the time? Because, for example, you know, one could argue that the syringes that we've used in the second book, they don't crop up until, like, I don't know, 3 years after it's set. But you think, well, the metal was there, the encasings were there, the doctoral practice was there. Just because it wasn't publicly distributable, doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
Prototypes, exactly, and that's one of the brilliance when you can do certain historical dramas and historical set pieces and things, because, you know, there's a lot of films and crazy stuff that's out. I'm trying to think of, there's one that came to mind that I've half forgotten. One, this is a slightly different vein, but like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, all these sorts of things where it's got historical accuracies, but you kind of, because it is a work of fiction that way, and you've got your own twist on reality, you can be a bit more like, well, Marvel films are the new ones, are quite like that, especially with the new Black Panther movie, and it's like, yeah, people go, well, that technology wasn't there for that time. It's like, well, if the resources, the knowledge and the material was, then who's to say it didn't exist? You know, patenting, you know, for example, with Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, it was, Tesla never wanted to patent anything. He wanted everything to be free, and he wanted everyone to have access to it. But Edison was the one who, I believe, ended up patenting the light bulb and this sort of stuff. And people were like, oh, Edison made it. It's like, well, no. Obviously, we only know from history that we think Tesla made it. You could argue someone else may have made it. But for this example, we'll say Tesla made it. And it's like, well, just because it's not in public knowledge doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's one of the things I've said to people about when you see with AI and robots and this sort of thing. There's a video of some robots walking, opening a door and this sort of thing, and it's crazy to watch, and I was like, that's amazing. But chances are the tech is actually beyond that, because they're actually, a lot of what, whether it's scientists, whether it's the government, whether it's this, that, or the other, even movie making or script writing, you don't show necessarily the first thing you think of, the initial thing. You know, when the next film that's going to win an Oscar, you're not necessarily going to have the person who's writing it constantly going on about it and showing you all the time. It's going to seem like it came out of nowhere, when in reality there's books, there's films, there's a film which I still have yet to see, which I really want to watch, called Boyhood, and it was I think it's 12 or 13 years to make, because It's a story of boyhood, and it's the same kid actor, and it's him growing up throughout. So they filmed it over 13 years, and like maybe when that was first in the pipeline, people talked about it a little bit, and maybe a few people knew about it. But the film comes out, and people go, "Where did that come from?" It's been in the works for 13 years. The idea has already been out there, and one of the intriguing things that I'll bring up as well is with inspiration. It's such a it's very very nice to hear you say about you were inspired and you were like no time like the present, because that's what I've done with the podcast. It was just I've spoken to quite a few people who have got callings, whether it's Callum, who obviously he's in a band and stuff, and then I've got other friends who are doing other sort of passions. I mean, Josh is going into teaching. Obviously, you're an author. There's Steph, who is on the podcast that will be released today, actually, when I'm recording this. So when you're listening to this, it will be a couple of weeks ago. She's into YouTube, and she was just like, I just decided to do it because I kind of felt like it. And I found that with podcasting, I mean, with what you said earlier about purpose and things like that, is with the argument of whether or not life itself and the universe was created out of purpose or whether it was a mistake or whatever is not necessarily relevant to this. Of just a lot of people, it doesn't happen quite as often now, but some people still feel this way, where they're always like, but what's the meaning of life? And I remember watching Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is one of my favourite films ever. Yeah. That film was just brilliant. And when it's like the brilliance of that computer being like 42, and everyone's like, wait, what? And it's like the whole brilliance of what the writer of the books and things, I think Douglas Adams, I think his name is, the brilliance of what he was I feel like he was kind of put across was that question is a moot point. There's no meaning of life, because the thing is, it's whoever is living that life, they put their own meaning into it. Yeah. If you want to be Steve Jobs, I mean, a lot of people can criticise Steve Jobs for 100 things, but if we just look at him, he wanted to change the world with technology. He fucking did. Yeah. He may not have made the first smartphone necessarily. You can argue Windows made loads of more, and tablets and this sort of that in earlier phases. But he was the one who fronted the company, who changed the market. He changed everything. And even though a lot of people who are super Android people, I don't really give a shit. I've just got an iPhone for ease of iTunes, to be honest. But it's like, I don't care what phone you've got, to be honest. It's, he changed the face of it because he pushing forward this innovation and stuff because he had the vision. And him just doing that, one dude with a vision and a turtleneck, he pushed it, and now we've got the internet and every piece of every information ever in our pockets. And that has changed everything. That's changed the way we communicate. That's changed the way we absorb information. Even on like micro levels of you're talking with your mates, with like people coming to life, people first being this incarnation of humans, Homo sapien. What about Homo erectus? What about Neanderthal? What about all these sorts of other ancestries of it? We have this conversation. We have this conversation, and we can just look into it. We can just Google it. We can just find out immediately. And just Steve Jobs doing that, he had this yearning, this vision, this desire to do it, and he did it. Yeah. And I find that with the podcast, it's so weird because obviously my personal views, I don't necessarily believe in a deity, but it does seem like something is kind of, it might be a subconscious, who knows what it is, but it's not relevant what it is, but what it does just, there's something to your core that something feels right. It's just something, whatever you're doing in your passionate states, something is making you feel like this is just what I need to do in a sense. Yeah. Whether or not it ever amounts to anything, whether it's just you writing all these books, I would love them to become great and you become a famous author, but even if they didn't, it's a therapeutic way of getting your own, in a lot of senses, I imagine, a lot of your own demons out, as well as kind of helping yourself figure yourself out while writing all these sorts of things, as well as just spending time and putting time and effort pushing into a project is so healthy for people. You need a place to focus. Everyone's got their work that you make money for and it's not that great. But when it's something that is your choice and you can go at your own pace, and it's if you have a week where you just feel a bit crap or you're busy, you don't have the pressure to do it. Therefore, you don't make this work potentially worse. It's your own project. You do it when you want, This podcast I try and release every week, but sometimes, like last week, I was in Wales. I didn't have time. I could have stressed myself out and done it, but I was just like, this is my hobby. This is my passion. I'm not going to make myself do something I really don't want to do just because. It's no one. And that's one of the beauties of this book and this sort of thing. And it's like, what I love about one of the reasons I did a podcast, and one of the things I like talking about Steph with YouTube and you with your book, is when you can tell someone's passionate about something, you see their eyes light up with it, and you know that it means so much to them. letting someone just talk about their favourite thing is just, it's unlike anything else. You can have all these, there's great conversations you can have with people about 100 things, but a lot of the time in today's society, you get all these conversations that just, they're null. They null and void. You have this conversation, at the end of the conversation, you've gained nothing. It's just pointless. You talk about the weather for an hour, you talk about this for ages, you talk about all this shit, and it's just like, I don't care about any of this stuff. But when you have someone who's truly passionate about something that they're really into, it's almost enlightening in a way, and it makes me want to try better. And when I saw Callum doing his music thing and a few other of my friends pursuing their passions, I was like, why the hell not? Life is so short. Yeah. I could die tomorrow. What's the reason I'm going to give to not pursue my passion, to not pursue my hobby? So you doing this with being an author, and how passionate I can see you are with your book, and how intricate all the ideas are, it's incredible. And I really, the fact that you've had the discipline within yourself to be able to write 2 novels and you're continuing to write more is incredibly commendable. So it's fantastic. So we're coming up nearish to the hour mark, and I feel like I'd love to talk to you more about this, but we're going to try and do another podcast for something else. So what I'd say is we'll wrap up this conversation for now, take a little break, get another cup of tea, and if you just repeat the names of your books, where you can kind of find them and get them, if there's any social media outlets or anything they can find you on or anything like that, and just some final words, and then we'll wrap this one up and then we'll get ready for the next one. So if you want to just self-promote, it's time. You've sold the book to us. I think it sounds like a great idea. Let's hear a little bit more about the more not as exciting side of it, the more marketable side.
Yeah, it's so it's called A Light in the Mist is the first one, and Scarcrow the second one. They can be found on Novum Publishing, and what you have to do is when you come up to the page, you click on Books, then go to a section called Other and Miscellaneous, and it should be on the first page, and you can find it there. Otherwise, in 3 weeks' time, Scarcrow will be on Amazon. It's cheaper there as well, so I would encourage you to buy it from there. And the first one has been on there for about a year now. So, yeah, feel free. But obviously, we're endeavouring to get them into libraries all across. I'm already in touch with libraries in London, as well as down here and up Middlesex and Leicester sort of area as well. So we're trying to spread it, because I know loads of people, like, they come up with a money-making scheme and they're like, oh, it's not for the money, it's not for the money. Quite literally, it's not for the money. It is about spreading a message of hope to people and reaching as many people as possible and just encouraging them. You are the best person you're ever going to be. Any ambition you have, fully go for it. Don't let culture hold you down. Don't let anybody denounce you. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worth it, that you can't do it. Whether finance stands in your way, it doesn't matter. You can scrimp, you can save. It doesn't matter what walk of life you've had. For goodness sake, I've seen people that have made themselves into successful businessmen and women, and they've come from completely destroyed walks of life. You know, they've been former drug addicts, they've been into prostitution, all these different kinds of things, and yet they have built themselves up because they refuse to listen to people that would keep them down. That's the point. The whole point of all these books is to, yes, tackle the problems that we have in our own society, but it's to encourage you to get through them, basically. All future books will be published through Novum Publishing, I hope. I hope that coming out of the EU doesn't affect our relations, because obviously they're an Austrian company. I hope it doesn't make any difference. It shouldn't do. But if it does, obviously I can keep you updated. Basically, you can go on there, and like I say, we'll be getting it into the library. So even if you feel like, oh, yeah, I want to get on board supportingly, but I can't quite, manage what you're asking for it, because, I don't think it's worth $12.99, to be honest. But get the ebook. Or I'm not a reader. That's a lot of the reasoning that I get is I'm not a reader. I'll wait for the film to come out. I appreciate the fact that you have such faith in it, but pass it to someone who does read. Because if we can spread the message, then we can help as many people as possible. Is the idea. And like I say, all of them will be published through Novum, and then 3 weeks after its release date, it will be out on Amazon, and hopefully, as more get sold, we'll be pushing for it to get into the major superstores like WH Smith, Waterstones, Tesco's and the like. And then hopefully, get bigger and better. But like I say, the idea is that this isn't just myself being an author. It's more about representing voices that otherwise can't speak. I was a big wrestling fan, still am. There's no shame in admitting it. I like watching half-naked, sweaty men wrestle. What can I say? The point is, you know, the divas are just as good. The point is, there was a superstar on there called CM Punk. He used to come out to Kill Switch, This Fire Burns. It was the first thing that actually got me into metal.
Oh, nice.
And he used to come out and he said, "I'm the voice for the voiceless." And that has stuck with me, like, most of my life. And I thought, you know what? There is nothing better than representing so many people that can't speak for themselves. Because for all the adverts that come on, that you see, and you think, yeah, okay, that's a real need, and that needs to be solved. There are so many things that aren't advertised that are still carrying on, that have been carrying on for 2,000 years, for hundreds of years. And as we go back, you know, with all these different future books, we have loads of different series planned. I mean, I can happily share with you, I have enough books planned to last me the next 56 years.
Well, that's a good thing. We want to hear this sort of inspiration, and I think everything that you've just said is absolutely perfect. And listening to this conversation with you, people should hear the genuine passion you have for all of this, and with a more in-depth listen into what the sort of ideas of the books are, I think that will really help people sort of get to grips with it, and it will show that you don't seem like you're just trying to sell it for money. It is truly, when it's a passion, then it doesn't matter what financial things stand in your way, or even how quote unquote successful it is. You'll still just keep going. Yeah. So, you know, whenever, with all your upcoming books and things like that, I'll make sure I share it on, social media, on the Genuine Chit-Chat page and all that sort of jazz. And I'll include all the information in the info of this podcast and on the YouTube links and all that sort of jazz. So, thank you very much, Wayne. This has been absolutely fantastic. You know, your books sound amazing, and as I said, I'll put all the info in the descriptions. And we'll stop this podcast here, and we'll continue the next one in a bit about your degree in paleontology, which is quite a different thing. But thank you very much, Wayne, for being on this.
Thank you for having me.
And that's the end of the podcast. As always, thanks for tuning in, guys. Next week's episode, as I said at the start, is going to be with Wayne once again, but it'll be about paleontology, where, you know, we talk about fossils and mass extinction events and dinosaurs, and it's an absolutely riveting chat. It's loads of fun, really interesting. It's actually one of the ones that I've been listening to myself, not just when I edit it and that sort of things, but like listening to it because there's quite a lot of information, and I couldn't absorb it all in one sitting of just chatting with him. So I've listened to it again. It's a fantastic chat. I can't recommend it enough. So that'll be released next week. And as usual, guys, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Find us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and all the other usual places. And if you review us on iTunes or Stitcher or anything like that, it's really appreciated. So thanks as always for listening, guys, and I'll talk to you next week.